There is nothing you'll do in life that's more challenging, difficult, and rewarding than being a parent. Nothing with greater highs or lower lows. You have little kids for a very short period of time. It is a major mistake not to notice that and not to appreciate it.
We're dealing with a pattern of misbehaviors with our son, who's 3 years old. Whenever we want to leave the house, he starts running away.
We have to be places at certain times.
When a disciplinary issue arises, you need to make space to master it. I have to not do what I thought I was going to do for 10 minutes to set this right.
Our 13-year-old throws tantrums quite often when he doesn't get his way. We spoiled the heck out of him.
When you spoil a child, so to speak, you take away from them the opportunity to develop their own competence by doing too many things for them. The consequences of his abdication of thought is that other people think for him. That's what'll happen.
Our daughter was bullied at her school.
As this is happening, our son turned to some substance abuse.
Look for mood changes and behavioral changes, and then you can tell your kid, look, it might be an unpleasant conversation that we have to have, but I'm not going to let you be miserable and drift away. Discuss the disciplinary strategies. Discuss the rules. Discuss what it is that you want from your child. Talk that through so that you're the same person. The more effective you are in laying out these disciplinary rules, the more they'll like you. Rules consistently applied with minimal force and plenty of patience. You don't want to let your worry destroy the pleasures of the moment. Just because children know less about the world doesn't mean they're not paying attention, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're stupid. They're not stupid, and they're watching.
He did.
It's very common for people who are extremely malevolent to tell you exactly what they're going to do and then do it.
Yes.
Far more common than people think. And
Yeah.
the fact that people are blind to that reality points to something that we'll have to discuss in more detail. This insistence by naive people in the West that no such thing as malevolence exists, right? All perpetrators are victims until proven otherwise.
Victims we haven't understood yet, or they may have had a bad childhood.
Well, no doubt they did, but there's plenty of people who had bad childhoods who don't turn into malevolent psychopaths.
That's my observation.
So, yes,
too.
it's definitely the case. Let's delve a little bit deeper into what happened. I want to lay some propositions before you. When October 7th made its presence known, the first thing that occurred to me, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, if I have some misapprehension, the terrible hand of Iran is behind Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran has absolutely no compunctions about sacrificing every single Palestinian to the cause in as brutal a fashion as possible to capitalize on the public relations scandal that can be made of that.
Yeah.
They've got no feeling whatsoever for the Palestinians. They're pure cannon fodder in the eternal war against the great Satan and Israel, right? The U.S. and Israel.
Yeah.
That seems appropriate?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what the hell? I went to Oxford, and the first bloody thing that those half-wits asked me when I was on stage was if I was happy about this tweet I made on October 8th, which was, "Give them hell, Netanyahu," which I paid quite the price for, let me tell you. And although not so much a price as many people have paid, put it that way. And so what's Israel to do when they're faced with a disposable people, so to speak, that will be sacrificed at a moment's notice by their own leadership, by their own corrupt philosophy, and by the mullahs of Iran? What possible response could Israel have, except to roll over and submit?
Well, a lot of people would like them to do that, of course, but that's not an option. There's a famous story that Joe Biden tells. It's actually a good story for Joe Biden. Being Joe Biden, he's told it a lot. But he when he was a young senator, he once met Golda Meir, former prime minister of Israel, indeed the prime minister during the 73 war. And she famously said to Joe Biden when she was showing him around, you forget, Senator Biden, we have a secret weapon. And Biden thought that Golda Meir was going to tell him about Israel's nuclear project. And he was all ears. And he said, what's your secret weapon? She said, we have nowhere else to go.
Right.
So anyone who thinks that rolling over is a possibility for Israel is simply somebody who wants them to be gone. What is clever about Hamas and its backers in Iran, the Iranian revolutionary government, is that they know exactly how to put Israel in an even more intolerable situation each time they attack. So, for instance, they know that if you kidnap Israelis, one of the absolutely central things of the fabric of Israeli society, as with most Western societies, is you don't allow your citizens to remain behind, just like you don't leave your soldiers behind. That if you fall behind enemy lines, if you are taken behind enemy lines, the state will do everything it can to get you back. And that has been a compact in Israel since the foundation in 1948, and a really central thing. So Hamas knew, and I have lots of testimony from people who, for instance, overheard terrorists on the morning as they were lying dead or other things, heard the terrorists at, for instance, the Nova Party debating which of the young girls they should shoot and which they should kidnap. And, you know, there were debates that they might have had too many people, too many girls to take back, for instance. But Hamas did the kidnapping knowing that to have 250 Israelis in captivity is to have an unbelievable advantage over the Israelis, because they're going to have to come in. They're going to try to save them. They're going to try to rescue them.
They'll exchange hundreds of terrorists for single Israelis.
As happened recently, an exchange of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails for committing acts of terrorism, preparing suicide vests, trying to carry out bombings, and much more, knife attacks. They will exchange sometimes hundreds of those Palestinians for, as happened the other week, the coffins of 2 Jewish babies. So,
well, one of the things that's striking about your book is your continued explication of the Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists, psychopaths, their willingness to exploit every element of human decency to wage the most destructive possible of wars,
yes.
Right? So the tunnels, let's go into that for a minute. So Gaza is 11 by 11 miles, approximately 140 square miles, 350 miles of tunnels, right? Longer than the London Underground, which is a stunning fact. Stunning fact.
Longer than the London Underground, and as I joked to the British military friend, rather better run.
6,000 entrances, many of them in the bedrooms of children.
Almost always where the tunnel entrances come up, they come up in children's bedrooms, in houses throughout Gaza. They come up inside mosques, well, they come up inside hospitals. Even in 2014, the BBC acknowledged that the Hamas leadership were coming up from tunnels underneath the Shifa hospital, which is one of their command headquarters. By the way, all of that is, for anyone who cares about this, completely against every law of war. The Geneva Conventions, every convention of war is you are not allowed to fight, you're not meant to fight in civilian clothing, you're not meant to fight and fire from places of worship, you're not meant to stockpile ammunition in hospitals, you're not meant to make civilian homes targets for reasons that our species thought we all understood.
Sufficiently victimized perpetrators have no reason to abide by any standards.
No,
How about
and of course,
that for an argument?
And of course, militarily, this is all to Hamas's enormous advantage, because again, they know that if there is a stockpile of ammunition or a terrorist or a tunnel entrance or whatever in a civilian home, and even if the Israelis tell all the locals to get out, the world's media will say that Israel bombed or invaded a civilian home.
Or a hospital or a place of worship.
There's a member of the Israeli
None of those words have the same meaning.
None of them.
In Gaza that they do in the West.
None at all. It's whenever it's reported that, that a hospital has been hit, it's usually reported in the world's press, as Hamas wants, that the Israelis just decided to bomb a hospital, as if they're so evil, these Israelis, that they even bomb hospitals. There was a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, Gadi Eisenkot, who I quote in the book because he lost his son fighting in Gaza in the aftermath of October the 7th. And the next day he lost his nephew, also fighting in Gaza. His nephew was killed because as the Israelis were trying to do this incredibly delicate military operation to get back the hostages, destroy the leadership of Hamas, and minimize any possible civilian casualties, Gadi Eisenkot's nephew was fired upon from a mosque by Hamas terrorists who gleefully opened fire on him and his unit. And they were meant to be sticking to the... Hamas were doing that. The Israelis were trying to stick to the normal laws of conflict and not just destroy the mosque. And so they lost soldiers. This is another example of the way in which Hamas do this. Any normal society that valued the life of their own civilians, like America, Britain, Israel, would, if it knew that its people were going to come under bombardment, often do what the Israelis did in the south and indeed across much of the country, which is you build bomb shelters in every home. And you have bomb shelters in every civilian area. And across the south of Israel, that's the case, as it is in the north, because it's been being shelled by Hezbollah for 20 years. But only in Gaza do you get a situation where, and I quote one of the Hamas leaders saying this in an interview with Al Arabiya last year. This Hamas leader was asked by a friendly Arab journalist, why, if you say the civilian casualties in Gaza are so high, why can't you allow the civilians of Gaza to shelter in your tunnel networks that you've built underneath Gaza? And the Hamas leader says, but the tunnel system is not for the civilians. The tunnel system is for our fighters and for our weaponry. And the interviewer says, well, who's to look after the civilians? And he says, well, the international community.
Right. Well, that's just testament to the fact that the Palestinians are essentially cannon fodder for the eternal war against Israel and the United States.
Yes, but it's even worse than that. That of course, an army that fights by the laws of war, which the IDF does, like the American Army, like the British Army, makes mistakes for sure, like the American Army, like the British Army, but that fights by the laws of war. When it encounters a terrorist army like this, the civilized army seeks to minimize the civilian casualties, as the IDF has done, and anyone who claims that it hasn't just does not know what's been going on for the last 18 months.
And believes Hamas reports.
Which
Why would anyone ever believe Hamas reports?
Yeah, it's. I mean, why go to a mass murderer to find out their account of their actions? You know. But the point is that when an army like that encounters an army that not just desires death for its enemy, but desires death for the people it purports to govern, and with a kicker in it, seeks death itself. This is a realm of fanaticism and what I call it's a death cult, a cult that literally worships death. The leadership of Hamas, who I quote in the book, have for decades boasted about the extent to which they love death, embrace death. And one of the underlying things in this book, as you know, which we'll come on to doubtless later, but is what happens if a society that actually values life encounters a death cult that worships and glories in death for its foes, but also for itself. And we have
suffering and death.
We have seen such movements throughout history. We have seen them, but most of the world has forgotten about them. And I would argue that Israel, to a great extent, forgot about them until 6:30 in the morning on October the 7th, 2023.
Possessed by the spirit of Cain.
Yes.
And that accounts for some of the anti-Semitism too. So let me run something by you. I want to flip to how the world turned. So it is the case that when people develop post-traumatic stress disorder, they relatively rarely develop it in response to a tragedy, even if it's a painful tragedy. They tend to develop it, one risk factor is being naive. Seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, let's say, assuming goodwill on everyone's part, including your own, and then encountering a situation, sometimes a situation that you're deeply involved in, where malevolence raises its head. The West is very sheltered and, I would say, blind to malevolence, blind to its existence. In the academic realm, there's no discussion of good and evil. Evil is an archaic term, and malevolence is a consequence of trauma, right? A consequence of privation. And that's simply not the case. It's now, I read a book a while back, and I don't remember which one it was, unfortunately, but it described the erasure of the Byzantine Empire from the Western imagination. Now, I was a relatively old person before I really had any sense at all of the extent of the Byzantine Empire or the catastrophe of its demolition. And the author of this particular book believed that the defeat of the Byzantine Empire by the Islamic world, and maybe by the psychopaths of the Islamic world, was so traumatic to the West that we just erased it from our historical memory. And then it seems to me, Douglas, that something like that is going on right now. I mean, you look, let's talk about the universities for a moment. Now, there's a fair bit of pathology in the universities, a fair bit. It's like top to bottom. They're absolutely incorrigible as far as I'm concerned, especially the Ivy Leagues. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should be deprived of all funding as far as I'm concerned. In any case, the protests that emerged there and all across the world, you detail out, and with some great sadness and amazement. But I think part of it is that it's not within the purview of the people who are protesting to replace their theory that the victims are uprising with the notion that a malevolent cult of death that worships sadistic suffering and annihilation exists. It's too far outside their worldview. Now, there's more to it than that, because Iran is, you saw that the Ayatollah, this is the most amazing thing. The Ayatollah himself congratulated the American universities, or the universities of the UK for that matter too.
He congratulated the Western students for joining the anti-colonial struggle. Not mentioning to the students that, of course, he, Ayatollah Khamenei, had ordered the gunning down of their contemporaries across the streets of Tehran in 2009, and on many other occasions. A
minor issue,
but when Iranian students come out on the streets to protest against the actual oppression of the Islamic Revolutionary government in Tehran, Ayatollah Khamenei, who congratulates the Western students for uprising, shoots the students who uprise in Iran. But that's a detail.
Yes, it's an ignorable detail, clearly. And there's another issue that seems to be operating at the universities. A disproportionate number of the protesters, or the protester puppets, you might say, are young women, right? And so there's something to that too, because it's in the nature of young women, I would say, to adopt the mien of sympathy towards victimization and fail to see the predators lurking underneath underneath the rocks, let's say. Women haven't traditionally fought wars. They're not necessarily equipped to identify actual enemies. Their proclivity is sympathy, and that's exacerbated in the case of naivety. And there's a great intermixture of pride in that too, in that female sympathy can, what would you say, overcome the pathology of victimization. That's Eve, as far as I'm concerned, clutching the serpent to her breast. And the universities have become feminized to a great degree. And then there's this incredibly deep, and people overall, I think, in the West have no idea how pathological the universities have become. The social sciences, the humanities run on an oppressor-victim narrative. And everything is seen through that light. And you can learn the tenets of the oppressor-victimizer narrative in 5 minutes.